secret technique. Ooh, what is it? I want to hear. Well, I was really fortunate a few years ago in our tour of New Zealand to visit a gentleman that, well, I guess the best way to characterize him is a bit of an eccentric. And eccentric is great because it's people who aren't in the normal mold. And this gentleman was Mr. Fred Fields. And I was fortunate because I think he saw, this guy comes from the other side of the world, from Canada. Yeah, you know what? I can talk a bit about what I do. And Mr. Fields had developed a technique he called programming seeds. And I was really fortunate because he showed me results. And the one that absolutely floored me was the results of eucalyptus seeds that were programmed versus those that were not programmed, that were planted side by side 17 years before. So eucalypts grow quite quickly in New Zealand, and so he'd get this eucalypt tree that was about like this, and it was, yeah, that's pretty good for a 17-year-old tree, non-programmed. And then the other tree next to it, same soil, same conditions, same rainfall, same everything. That tree, you could I was about like this. I thought, wait a minute, the other one did well, and this one was like this. It was easily 3 times or 4 times the size. And it was a programmed tree. And it was like, what in the world happened? 17 years old. And he showed me he had cut some down, and he was selling them for veneer. They were being peeled off as veneer. He showed me, and I'd never seen growth rings like that. Each ring was an inch. Usually you see a tree ring and there's these, bands. And in our climate, sometimes they're pretty tight. But this was from 1 year to the next, there was 1 inch. It was like 1 inch of growth per year. That was staggering. So I wanted to find out more. And so he went on to explain to me that in the life of a seed, or rather in the life of the species, that species has gone through many, many, many extremes, soils, climates. Why? Because it hasn't been around for 1,000 years or 10,000 years or 100,000 years. Most seeds have been around probably millions of years. And they've survived all kinds of situations and extremes. And he said in all those years, that seed has been accumulating experience that it locks into its genetic code. And he explained to me that if you can imagine a bank of switches, a huge bank, imagine a wall of switches. Those switches are the genetic ability of that plant. And so if it happens that the plant is at the very northern limit of where it can grow, well, the switch for cold, short season better be turned on or that plant won't survive. As the same thing in the southern extreme for that plant, it better have its tolerance to hot summers turned on. And so he said we can program or direct that seed to give us characteristics that are very, very good if we want to grow that plant so that it will really grow well. And so the example that he gave me was for those trees. He said all he did was he took the poorest soil he could get. Now this is, on our farm, this is the poorest soil we can get. It's pure white beach sand. It's not quite white, but it's pure sand. There's nothing. There's no organic matter in it. It doesn't hold water. We'll see that in soils. And this soil is like, there's not a lot of things that want to grow in this soil. So what Mr. Fields would do is he would take this soil and he would fill a pot with just this soil. Imagine taking our seeds, we're putting it in a nice growing medium, but he said no. He said you take the seed and you plant it in the absolute poorest soil you could find, and then you give it the absolute minimum amount of water that it needs just to germinate and survive. Not thrive, just survive. So he says, what happens? Have you ever seen a seed starting? So he explained to me that that seed, when it starts and it first pokes out the end, it sends out first, it goes down. And that I've always understood. That the seed, you never see the results. You're seeing something underground, something invisible first. It looks like the seed hasn't moved, but in fact it sent out its first root, and that root goes down. And he said that first root is really the environmental sensor. It's what goes out and says, imagine the seed in the rest of the package in the seed. It's going, hey sensor, what's it like out there? And the sensor is checking it out and it goes, it's really poor out here. There is not much, and it's really dry in here. It's not a great situation, so you better turn on the switch for very dry and very poor soil. So he says, you do that, you just keep that plant surviving, you grow it in the pot for 2 months, and then you take that plant and you transplant it into a much better soil. It's not hard to be much better than the absolute poorest. So what happens? That plant says, okay, you know what? Somebody switched on poor soil and almost no water. I can grow and survive in poor, dry conditions. And all of a sudden it's put into a medium soil with normal amount of water. The plant goes, wow, look at the abundance out here. I mean, I can really perform on these conditions. I don't know how I won the lottery, but you know what? I'm going to make the most of these conditions now. And then the plant just excels. It gives you a log like this in 17 years. How come? Because plants don't change situations in most cases. They have all those switches. They have all these genes. They have the ability to grow in so many conditions. But unless they start off in that condition, they don't have those genes switched on. They're not programmed for other than where they land and where they have to grow all their life. But if we take that one and we put it in better, we see what that plant can do. And that really, it made me understand so many things. I understood how come when we bought a plant and we brought it to our farm with soil like this, or even more gravelly, how come that plant just, it languished? It's never able to do much. Well, we did the reverse programming, or at least we bought a plant that's reverse programmed. Because most growers say, I want to start my plants in the absolute best soil I can, so that we get a quicker plant and it's growing faster. And that's okay, as long as you'll take that plant and plant it in a similarly good soil or great soil, or better. Then it will perform. But when it goes backwards, when it's programmed for more and it has less, it's what we had observed. And then it was like, that makes so much sense. That makes sense. So if you grow seeds, direct seeding is good because the plant will have to grow where the conditions are. But if you can, even do that Mr. Fields experiment with some programmed and some not, you'll be able to see a side-by-side comparison. How well did that work? And I want to see, that's one of my next experiments to do, is to apply that, grow, especially trees, especially fruit trees, in those kind of conditions and see what is possible. Because seeds have so much potential that is not unlocked. And I believe we can get 2, 5, probably 10 times the results on some fruit trees if we do things that are not common knowledge. So consider programming seeds, and certainly consider how you can get reverse program. You can buy plants, or you can grow plants in good and put them in worse soil. So avoid that. That's the first thing. Try not to do that. Or if you start seeds, at least start them in a soil that's, if you do in trays, put them in a similar soil to where they're going to be. But try to put them in a worse soil to where they're going to be. Imagine a tomato plant that'll grow 10, 12 feet high and produce 500 pounds of tomatoes. Absolutely, that's possible. But if you get into perennial plants, where you have that luxury of 2 months of programming and then transplant, so think of perennial plants, think of perennial shrubs or even trees, that's where you'll see that result long-term really shine. So programming seeds, wow, what potential to unlock from seeds. Remember that. If I say soil has 3 most important components, and you say, no, it's not NPK, I'm above that, I get that. If you say, well, soil needs water, yeah, it needs air, yeah, I am counting those as given. Soil needs water, soil needs air. But the main 3 beyond those that I want to look at are the 3 building blocks of really vital, essential, life-giving, health-giving soil. And those 3 are, in its purest form, carbon. So here's some biochar. So that's the purest form of carbon you can put in the soil. That's not the main type of carbon I'm talking about, but that is one form of carbon. So carbon is the most essential building block. Why? Because think of what you eat. You say, well, what do I eat? Well, what do you eat? You probably eat a lot of carbon-based foods. You say, oh, no, it's not carbon-based. Well, what are sugars? What are starches? What are fats? What's beyond that? Combinations of them. What is meat? Well, meat is mostly protein. Well, what is protein? Yeah, it's a combination. But all of them are based on carbon. Small, simple carbons, as in the case of sugars. More complex carbons, as in the case of fats. It's all carbon-based. We're carbon-based organisms. Carbon is the building block of life. That's what it took for life to get started. Not alone, granted, not alone, but carbon is essential. And the real reason carbon is so important, think of our lifestyle. Think of how we live. Fortunately, we're going away from a carbon-based energy and moving towards more regenerative type energy. But carbon is still the primary source of energy, but it's the primary source of energy for life and nature. Nature runs on carbon. You think, well, it runs on sunshine. Yeah, got it. Yes, it's sunshine. True. Sunshine is the energy source that powers photosynthesis. And the main components of photosynthesis is to create sugars. Sugars that are given off to the roots, through the leaves. They're called exudates, so we know that they exude or they give off sugars on the leaves. We know they exude or exudate sugars into the roots. But why would a plant do that? Why would it take the carbon in the form of sugars that it produced through photosynthesis, and why would it put them in those places? You think, oh, you know, they tell me it needs NPK. Yeah, nature doesn't run on just NPK. Nature runs on carbon, and we need to give it carbon so that it then exudates, or not that we need to give it, but we need to facilitate and improve how much carbon it can put into the system to feed the second part. So carbon is number one. Second one, to make use of that carbon effectively, we need soil life. And soil life is so essential because we are living on a live planet. We are living thanks to living soil. It's not dead soil. I mean, the soil's not dead. There's, what did they say? There's more life, microorganisms in about a teaspoon of soil than there is people on Earth. Think of it. Each little grain falling is like many countries of people. Kind of blows your mind when you think, no, yeah, if you, and now we can look much closer, look much deeper in and see, boy, it's kind of like Inception, you know, there's an insect. You zoom in, oh look, there's many insects living on the insects. You zoom in some more, oh, there's fungi and bacteria living on the insects, living on the insect. And then you zoom in and then you go, wow, look, there's all these strands of hypha, of mycelium, and there's viruses living on, and how much further? Then there's viroids, and there's, how far do you, well, we're limited by how much we can actually see what's going on. So carbon is important to feed the soil life, which is important. And the third one, because the two work well, but they do need the one that forms most of the catalyst, that forms most of the synthesis, that forms most of the proteins and the elements. It's the minerals. So every plant needs a little bit of molybdenum, a little bit of manganese, a little bit of iron, a little bit of, there are so many elements, and they are found in the mineral fraction. And the mineral fraction, we'll get into it, it is really, we are, what does the Bible say? We are dust, and dust to dust we will return. How can we be dust? What's dust? Well, if you look down to it, dust is simply rocks that have been ground up to a powder. That's the essence of dust. It's the elements in rock that are now available to plants, available to microorganisms as the bridge to help carbon join with life and form a real whole, if you like. So those three are the key building blocks, and we'll go into each one more deeply to understand how important they are to form a soil that is working, that is alive, that is really functioning. We saw trios. I like to call those trios the horizontal trios because it's the trees as they're laid out. 1, 2, 3. That's the horizontal trios. And then we have the second design concept, which is layers or vertical trios or biodiversity. I can call it many things, but it's that adding the extra oomph, the extra diversity, the extra layers to the idea of trios. So now imagine we had trios, 1, 2, 3. That's our pattern. Nitrogen fixer, fruit, fruit, nitrogen fixer, fruit, nut, or nitrogen fixer, nut, nut. That's the possibilities for the tree trios. But now we get a vertical trio. And for vertical, I mean the first layer of the vertical are the trees that we talked about for trios. The second layer of this trio that's vertically is everything that's underneath. Now we're talking about the shrubs. Well, actually, it's more of a trios plus one because there's really 4 layers now. But for the shrub layer, we can put 1, 2 to 4, probably even to 6 shrubs per tree. Now you go, wait a minute, how can I put 6 shrubs under a tree? If you have a standard size tree, a large fruit tree, you could put 6 shrubs under a tree. But let's aim to get 2 underneath a tree. That's the model I'm aiming for. So you have 1 shrub on one side, then you have your tree, and then you have another shrub on the other side. So there's your second layer, which is shrubs. And the shrubs that I like to consider using are, I like gooseberry a lot. It's my favorite small fruit. And if you have a favorite, grow it. If you say, I love this, and if it grows well, then grow it. But I love it for the taste, but I also love gooseberries because they produce in the shade, in the semi-shade especially, and they don't produce well in full sun. So you want something that does underneath the trees, because now it's underneath the trees, in a space that normally, well, in conventional orchards, it's actually an herbicide strip. It's actually nuked so that there's no vegetation growing. We want vegetation because if we don't do something, vegetation will grow there. So let's grow what we want to grow. That's the idea of the layers, is you're growing something where something would normally grow anyway, but you're directing that growth to things that you want. So using gooseberries is a great choice. We also have blackcurrant. Blackcurrant is kind of just the secondary. It also will grow in semi-shade. It likes a little more, so it'll still grow and still produce in semi-shade. But watch them, and when you see, wow, they're not really producing much, now you have too much shade. So either you prune your fruit trees, or you're nitrogen fixing, or both, or you aim to move them to a sunnier location at the southern side, or no, at the sun side of your tree. Another one is red currant, and red currant is really is good in the early years, but when you reach probably about year 6, 7, when the trees are fully grown, it's too shady for them to properly produce. They'll still grow, they'll produce a little, but they will ease back. So that's my observation on those 3, gooseberry, blackcurrant, and red currant, in their shade tolerance. Another one that we use is hascap. That's not that well known nowadays yet, but it's also used to be called edible honeysuckle. It's a great one. It is a semi-shade. It'll grow really well in full sun, as opposed to gooseberry, which won't grow well in full sun, but it will grow and it will produce. So hascap is another one. 1, 2, 3, 4. A fifth one is aronia berries. That can get pretty high, so it's not just a shrub that keeps underneath it. It will grow to 4 or 5 feet. That's getting a little bit big for the shrub layer. We want something that usually stays to about 3 or 4 feet. But you can use it as well. I would say you can even use low bush blueberries if you're in the right conditions. It is a smaller shrub. It can grow in a partial shade. Consider it. It's a possibility. Another one is amelanchier, or Saskatoon berry. If it's a full Saskatoon berry, it grows to be large enough that I now actually put them in the space of a tree. So I started by having them as the shrub and found, yeah, they need more room. So I now plant them instead of a tree because they'll go to 3 meters. They're slow growing. They'll take a long time. They'll take longer to reach that full size than a tree does. But when they do, they're well worth it. The last 2 technically aren't shrubs. They're in the shrub layer, and they're there because they take a volume. I call it, it looks like a shrub. One is raspberries, and you think, well, raspberries, yeah, well, the raspberries can grow up. They're canes. So they're not technically shrubs, but they take up the space of a shrub. So use raspberries in the shrub layer. And the last one is actually a perennial plant that is rhubarb. And rhubarb, I used it and I have lots of it planted, but I'm seeing now after 10 years, it is no longer able to build up its reserves properly to produce well. It'll be there, it'll grow well in the spring, but it doesn't seem to store up enough sunshine in the summer to give a vigorous boost or a vigorous growth in the spring. I may be wrong. Maybe it's lacking fertility, maybe it's lacking manure or compost, but from what I'm seeing, it worked really well for the first 8 or 10 years. And after that, it's just kind of there. Even though we're not harvesting it much, it's just not producing as much. So I think it needs a little more than that semi-shade. It really needs a little bit the south side of trees. So consider that as a shorter term crop, not as the final crop for long term, because that shade condition is shady underneath a tree. Now perennials. So we went, what's the one? Trees, second layer, shrubs. Now the third layer, perennials. And we have tree, one tree, shrubs, two shrubs, perennials under each tree. I aim to get 16 perennials under a tree. And that number can vary for you. It's simply based on our block spacing, which is 8 feet between trees. Now, we'll look at spacing. Don't say, oh, he said 8, so I'm... Keep going in the course and you'll see, well, I'll explain the details and intricacies and the art and the science of spacing. The reason I say 16 is because of that spacing. So the idea is I want a perennial every foot. And why every foot? Now that reasoning came out just by observation and just by serendipity really, is I was starting to see that the mulch was disappearing. And it's the worms and the range that a worm can reach. So if a worm has a hole here from a perennial and it comes out and it goes 6 inches this way and all around the hole, if I have another hole 12 inches away, now you get from this one 6 inches, from this one 6 inches. And it's the simply practical point of a worm will cover the whole area if holes are spaced 1 foot apart. And I say holes because of the plastic mulch. But if you're using any other kind of mulch, the worms will still be effective in that range. They'll be effective in the middle as well. So that's where I spaced it as a foot plus. Most perennial plants do well if they're given that spacing of every 12 inches. So the ones I use are all of the onions. When the onions, what is it? There's a book called Roses Love Garlic. Roses. What family are roses in? Oh, the rose family. What family are all our fruit trees in? Apple, pear, plum, cherry, apricot. All rose family. So what do roses love? Garlic. What family are garlic? The onion family, or the Alliaceae. The alliums also known as. So anything that's in that type is a good complement to the fruit trees in the rose family. So I use Egyptian onion. I use chives, lots and lots of chives, and lots of garlic chives. If you want to grow one plant that you want to try garlic chives. You'll replace garlic almost with garlic chives. And then we go into perennial scallions. We have wild garlic, or it's also called ramps. That's a fantastic one. I don't have enough. We're multiplying the ones we have because that's something that we should grow more of. But the point is, whatever onion family plants you have, grow at least one, preferably many, under each fruit tree. So that's your perennials. How did I get to 16? I said 1 each foot. and there's 1 row on each side of the tree. So that's where 8 on this side, the tree row, and 8 on the other side, and that's how we get to 16. We also put in herbs in here, so thyme, rosemary, sage, any other herbs that I've tried a few. I haven't tried them all, that's for sure. But if you're like more medicinal herbs, grow them. We've put lavender in there. Whatever the conditions, and always put them in, try them, move them around, or multiply them and try them in different spots to find, wow, they really do well on this side of the tree or on that side of the tree. And so that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to find where is that plant the happiest, and then just keep multiplying it and putting it in that happy zone. Another one are perennial vegetables, and there's sea kale, and there's perennial arugula, and there's the flowers like daylily, which are edible flowers, and just keep putting in diversity. And that's why I say this layer is diversity. This is where you diversify your planting. But it's a whole other layer. Now, you say it's layers, right? We talked about the trees, the shrubs, the perennials, but we also now have a 4th layer. So it's trios plus, because I can't help but limit it to that. And there are many other layers. We could consider the whole mushroom layer as a layer, but I'm keeping it simple. Let's stay there. You could say, well, we could grow perennials for the root. Yes. So perennials can have many different. You can have plants that are ground covers, that are rampant in covering area. Yes. I call them perennials. So you can get complex. I like simple. I have a hard time thinking of more than 3 things. And so that's why it's like trios plus. So the plus is a climbing layer. So we have our trees, and on the case of our nitrogen fixers, we can add on to them a whole layer that then, and this was the big, wow, this is exciting, because now our nitrogen fixers, which in our climate, there's only seaberry, which can be a nitrogen fixer in that zone, in that role, and produce fruit, and only the female shrubs of seaberry. So now our other nitrogen fixers can have a vine climbing up them, and that vine, the main 2 we use is grape and kiwi. So we aim to have at least 1 vine per nitrogen fixer, not per tree. So now get this clear, because in the beginning I put climbers on everything, and I quickly realized no, because we would have, I remember having a climbing bean, just an annual climbing bean that climbed so vigorously up the apple trees and produced so many beans that instead of the apple tree being like this, by late summer that apple tree was crumpled over in half under the weight of beans. So I've been there and I've done that, and I don't recommend you grow your climbers on your fruit trees, but I do recommend you grow your climbers on your nitrogen fixers that are not fruiting. So my honey locust, the black locust, the Russian olive, all of the ones we're using, we want to have grape, either 1 grape, either 1 kiwi, or 1 grape and 1 kiwi. We're trying all 3 combinations. And that is really wonderful in boosting your productivity. So you have fruit, 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 not nitrogen fruit, fruit. That makes it nice. So we're using that space, we're creating diversity, and we're really boosting up the production from the orchard and the taste and and it just makes it so much better. So how many plants does it take? And this is where I said diversity, but it takes a lot of plants. Let's look for 1 acre. How many plants? That's 0.4 hectares. We put in 1 acre at the spacing we're putting in. Again, caveat, go get further deep into spacing for the trees you're going to use, on the rootstock you're going to use, on the species you're going to use. We use 450 trees in an acre. how many? We said 1 tree, 2 shrubs. Oh, so 900 shrubs in that 1 acre. How many perennials? We said 1 tree, 2 shrubs, 16 perennials. Ooh, do the math. That gives 7,200 perennials. You better get planting. You better get multiplying your perennials if you want to fill them in. And it takes a lot of plants. So get multiplying, because that actually ends up being the most costly part to fill in if you're buying plants, is the perennial layer. How many vines does it take? Come on, some of you are quick, I know it. You're saying, well, he said only on the nitrogen fixers, if there's 450 trees, so there's 150 nitrogen fixers, so at least 150 vines. If you're putting 2, grape and kiwi, but I don't recommend you try 2 on every tree. Let's say 150 to 200 vines that you would use. Total, a minimum of 8,250 plants if you're using the 4 layers and you're filling the space. Some of you are thinking, 8,000 plants. Yeah, it takes a lot of plants. Get multiplying, get propagating. If you're only using trees, shrubs, vines, which I said perennials takes the most plants, you still need 1,050 plants. Did I say get multiplying? You better get on the propagation course, because I'll show you how to multiply these in an easy way, in a far less costly. And it's not hard. It's just a little bit of cookbook, and we'll get multiplying in that course. So that looks at the trios that are now vertical: tree, shrub, perennial, and vines. That adds the vertical layer, that adds diversity, and that adds productivity. One important part of pruning is renewing an old tree. This is the old organic orchard, just apple trees, and most of these trees are nearing the end of their life. When a tree begins to decline, 2 things can happen. It can outright die, or what is above, the old growth, can be in bad enough shape that the tree responds, and it's a natural response, by trying to renew itself, by trying to send out a new shoot. That's what I want to look at exactly today. How to renew a tree, different ways that it happens, different options, and how you can make a new tree out of an old tree. So let's get started. This old apple tree here, it's been on the block for a few years. So what happened was, a few years ago, it sent out just a shoot, and that could have looked like this. This is a 1-year shoot. So it sent out a new shoot in a good position, and the best position I like is right from the base. So it sent out that shoot. I left it, and last few years what I've been doing is clearing out any competing branches that are competing with my new future tree. So this way I have a trunk, and it was leaning, which isn't a big plus. I cut some big branches, and now it comes to a point where you decide, what are you doing? Are you keeping it? Well, no, I'm not keeping it. No big discovery there. But what are you doing with the new replacement? So in this case, it would be ready to take this out completely in this case, but this tree has got quite a lean to it. And so I didn't realize it was that bad. I could cut this whole tree off, but I will leave this part of it just to allow me a good anchor so I can actually pull this trunk straight. So I will leave most of this for this year. Another thing is, I know this year these trees should be producing well. So you don't want to be cutting your old tree down while your new tree is in fully juvenile or vegetative state. You remember, do you have a tree or do you have fruit? Well, just looking at the form of this tree branches. I haven't trained this tree, but it's sending out branches that are definitely tree patterned. And so it's a year away from really being the beginning of maturity. There are just a few flower buds on it, and I'm not sure they're even going to flower this year. So if I cut this off this year, all the energy that is going to go into this one will go into this one. Then what happens is you end up getting this one growing even more. So one of the things to do on your renewal tree is ideally wait until it is going to flower and begin to produce fruit. So how do you know that? Well, you look for flower buds, and you also look how vigorous is the growth. That's vigorous. You especially want to look at the top and see, yeah, that's grown about 2 feet or 60 centimeters. That's still a lot. So although I could, I won't cut it yet. I want it to produce one more year because this one isn't producing. And at the end of the year, during the winter time, when it's dormant, I will come in and cut this one down completely. For this year, I'm just going to let this produce some more fruit until this one has one more season. So when you're considering renewal, you want to know that balancing act. It's not perfect. It's kind of a fade in, fade out. You want to balance when to cut. Sometimes you don't have a choice. This one's so damaged, you have to cut it. All right. But if you can, keep clearing everything around it so that this one is not hindered, is not going to have branches that are not going to form because this one's in the way. So this is a nice last year in the way tree. I want to show you some other examples. Here's an example of something that's not ideal. Not ideal because, as I said, you want your renewal branch, and here's a good renewal branch, to be right down at the base. You want it to come out above the graft unit. You want it to come out there so that your tree will be basically coming out, almost coming out of the soil, not coming out of the trunk like it is here. This tree is in serious decline. It's growing, but yeah, it's really been affected. I'll leave this one, and I like to leave myself options. Worst case, you take it off. That's all right. But if you give yourself the option in a few years, then that makes it a lot easier. You're already there because the years will be adding on. So always try, if you see your tree is going downhill and you get a renewal branch, ideally not up here, ideally right down at the base, then leave it. Don't cut it off just because it's coming out from the bottom. Leave it, because generally nature knows best. If this tree senses that it's been damaged by all kinds of reasons, it could have been an ice storm. In this case, maybe it was too much of a cut up at the top, and it's basically lost some vigor, then it responds by trying to renew itself. Renewal is not something weird or it just happens. No, renewal is a natural phenomenon of the tree. So you want to work with it. Let the new branches, if you see that no, the tree's recovering, then you can cut your renewal branches. But just to give you an idea of what is not ideal up here, and why isn't it ideal? Because if I say I'm going to keep the tree here, I would end up cutting the trunk way up here. And that's a big cut on a big trunk, not ideal. I would do it, but what I know, and I've done some in the past, if I do that, I'm doing it to force a new shoot, and a new shoot likely will come out down here, which will be the best. So I would lose some years. It may not turn out, and hey, worst case scenario, your tree completely dies. But positive scenario, you may get a new shoot and one that you can start as a new tree without having to replant. And that's the great thing about renewal, is you get a new tree, but you didn't have to replant it. So not ideal. And in this case, I have started to clear around it, but it's kind of a, not ideal. If I have to, I will. So give yourself options, and the best option is right at the base. One example of higher up, well, here is lower down. Perfect renewal position. Renewing right from the base. That's perfect. That's what you want. You want a nice straight shoot. Perfect. It's great. The only thing is, if you look at the growth, look at that top. From here to here, that's about, that's 4 feet of growth. That is way too vigorous to cut this size of a tree and force that root energy into this small tree. So, again, clear around it, give it room, but don't cut the mother tree yet. So this one should have a big production this year. That will absorb a lot of the energy, a lot of the juice. This one will continue to grow, and the branches are in a perfect size to train. So this summer we should come back and do, already they're more flexible than they were just 2-3 weeks ago when we had snow on the ground, but that'll be a perfect size to come in and train all these branches, get it set up. I could literally bend the top, but I know that this tree will not stay at that size. So I'm not even going to bother. I'll let it grow. Even though it's a big shoot, it will grow to its full size, but I won't take this one off this year. I'll aim to take it off. I'll have to judge by the top, probably in 2 years. But in the meantime, I cut a big branch here. There's nothing on this tree on this half. So this new tree has all the space it needs. Nothing's hindering it, and it'll be a great replacement. I want to show you what a great replacement looks like next. So we saw an example of a tree that wasn't quite there yet. It wasn't old enough. And the tree that it was, the mother tree, was still alive. Here's a nice example. Mother tree has died. Now, the tree just responded that, you know what, I've got a replacement, I'm done, and I can die. And that's really what happened. This tree just gave up and died. The replacement is here, and it is now, and there are buds, here's flower buds, there are buds on it that are going to produce. So it's a perfect time to transition it. The replacement is old enough, it's now beginning to flower and fruit, and the old one is dead. So that's it, it's time, it's done its transitions. It's a really fade in, fade out. This one has faded right out, and this one's faded in. You look at the top, you look at the growth, and it's not excessive. It's very good growth because it's still a young tree, but it's not so much that I wouldn't want. In this case, the problem's been solved, it died, so this one's time. I want to show you how to transition it, how to make the cut when you have an existing trunk but a new one. First thing, when I want to change it over, I want to shorten the tree so that I'm left with a foot-long piece. So all the weight is off, all the stress is off, so that when I make a final cut, there's nothing going to tear, nothing going to break. It's just a nice cut. So because this one's in the wire, I'll cut this part off, I'll cut it lower, and then I'll make a third cut in the final. Because my new replacement branch is coming out, basically, it's coming out, I can put my hand under it, and then the top of it is here. Obviously, I can't cut all the way to the ground because I'll cut out my new growth. But I can cut all the way close to it and then angle this cut. So I'll make a cut around and a cut at about 45-degree angle so that the bark can actually close up nicely on this side. And then the last cut I have to do from the top because I can't go up on that angle. Now, that's not my final cut. Now I can shape it so that it heals over nicely. Live bark, it's all looking good. I'm good with that. This branch here, the bark will heal over. It will leave me kind of a stub here, which is good because it will act as the anchor for this tree. And that's basically it. I will be able to cut this one off shorter. And I've got my replacement with that. The only thing is I do want to put back my tree guard because that's basically what saved this young tree from being eaten by voles. There we go. Next, I want to show you one that's been done a few years ago, and you'll see how gradually that heals over and you can't even tell it was done. Final stage of the process. We have a tree that's renewal. The tree that was the mother tree has been removed I don't know when this one was cut, let's say a couple of years ago. This one is going to flower this year. It's going to start to produce. I trained some branches. Perfect, they're set. The branch, did you see that? Barely moved at all when you remove the wire, so that's good. The top, I'll have some clearing to do to remove it, but I mainly want to show you the base of how it looks after it's been cut off. And the original trunk, here's the original trunk. So this one came out lower than the previous one, but that's it. This part, it can't even rot away now because this one's, I can feel it's completely rooted in the soil. And so there you go. Now this is going to be a perfect tree for many years to come. The wire was set up nicely. And as this tree grows, the guard will actually expand. So that's the whole process of creating renewal in trees. Don't think if it's dying, you have to necessarily cut it. It's all a function of the root. As long as the root is alive, it will send up a shoot. And that shoot, it's either the cultivar, which in this case it is, or it's a rootstock, which case you can overgraft it. That's it. Choosing a property. That's the first step. If you've got a property, then you've got a property already. You've already got land. But if you haven't, there is a step. And I really go in depth in my book, and I'll include it with this course, because there's 2 chapters in there. Don't buy a farm, and on the hunt for a farm. They are really to help you narrow. This is what we went through, and there is decisions and really important things to consider in there. One of the first ones is, what do you want to do? Have you thought this through? You say, yeah, I want to plant things. Okay, you want to plant things. Are you really best suited to plants? Are you best suited to have trees? Or are you best suited to have animals? I like to make that distinction right out in the beginning, because some people, they want trees, but they would really prefer to have animals. And others, yeah, I don't like really dealing with animals. I want to have the plants or the trees. So that's the first distinction. And the soil and the choice of site will matter for that. Then within trees, if you say, yes, I want to have trees, or I want to grow mostly blueberries and raspberries, or, well, there's another distinction. And the site preferences for each of those, and even within fruit trees, the site preference of the different crops will determine what property you should look for. And you say, well, I already have the property. Well, that's why the ideal, and this is the ultimate goal, the ideal is, what is the absolute best site you can find for a given crop? And if you plant diverse, which is what I really recommend, then a mix or the dominant crop. Perhaps your most dominant crop will be cherries. So choose a site that's absolutely the best site for cherries. Ideally, historically, what areas in your region have been growing cherries? Find those. And there's a reason why they're the traditional or historically most used sites for cherries, because people have looked around. Well, what would be the best place to grow cherries? And they have specific requirements. Can't be too cold. It can be pretty hot. It can't be too wet, because cherries don't like getting wet feet, and so on and so on. So then you can add plums in that planting, for example. You can add grapes. They have very similar requirements. But when you get to the other edge of the spectrum, maybe pears, it's the best for cherries. It may not be the best for pears or apples. For example, in our orchard, I planted it and I irrigate in accordance with apples, because that's what we had the most of, and that's still what we have the most of. It's not the best site for apples, but because that's what I have the most, I irrigate in accordance with what apples need. Well, that happens to be a little too wet some years for cherries. And they're finding, my feet are wet most of the time, or a lot of the time. And so they show up with certain diseases that pop up in cherries that are really just problems of too much water. And you say, well, then just cut back the water. Well, if I cut back the water, that's great for the cherries, but they are not the dominant crop. There's only 3 cherries in a row. And to get the apples to do best, it needs more. So that's why I say you want to know what you're going to plant. Are you going to have mostly cherries? Well, that's different from mostly apples. Or it's different from mostly blueberries, and so on and so on. So before you even choose a site, you have to know what is it that you most want to grow. Unfortunately, from what I've seen, many people get excited and I want to go in the country and I want to plant some trees or I want to plant some shrubs, but they don't even know what they want to grow. That's why I say don't buy the farm. Rent it. Use somebody else's land. Try it. Start. You say, well, then we're not going to have that time that you spend doing with somebody else's property is an investment in your refinement of what you most enjoy, what you like doing the most. If you learn from this that, listen, I know what I want to do and I know now what I need to search for, that's the ultimate of what you'd want to attain, is what I want to grow, and now you'll know where I should choose to grow it. That's a big difference. That's really coming down to, now I know where I'm going, I know where I want to go, and now let's go. So in the book, I have we used it, I modified it from somebody's real estate book, and I found it really helpful. Now I'm talking about if you are going to choose a property. If you've got one, just catch this section because you'll go, yeah, I didn't think of that, or I didn't use this, or I didn't do that. But if you're searching for a property, I want to give you, in the search criteria, it's a checklist. And like a checklist, you can just check it off. Do I have this? Did I consider our views important? What about the abundance of water? Did I look at that? What's the quality of the water? And each of these criteria, you can score them. And that is important. Because if you're looking for a property and you're emotional, then don't bother with the idea of getting any kind of deal. If you're emotional and the real estate agent or the person selling it sees that, oh my God, you already moved in, you're looking at a property and you've already, in your head, you're here and you've moved in, well, they've got you they've got their hook in you, and they know that you could put out a price and they'll say, nope, it's 200,000, and you're saying, no, it's 150. And they see that you're already moved in, and you're going to be afraid. You're going to be emotional and afraid of losing this great property you found. Well, that's the whole point of a checklist, is you're not just looking at one. And if it's one, you say, okay, this is the one. And now this one got a score of 20 on 25, and you're going through the checklist, and you go see another property and you say, oh, this one scores only 18. And then you go see another one. Well, that's actually like a 12. The checklist will help you score each property based on the criteria that are important for you and for what you want to do. And then you say, hey, you know what? We don't have to be overly emotional about it. We know that the one that scored 20 is the best suited for what we want to do. And maybe before you sign on the dotted line, you see, hey, there's another one came up. We didn't put in this offer yet, but there's another one came up. Let's just go see it. Or nowadays, honestly, you can get a lot of information online, but if you're looking to grow things, you really have to go see. Because there are things that you won't know, and you can't tell by pictures unless you go see. And if you saw my observation course, you'll understand things like indicator plants, and you'll just walking the property. And if you didn't get the observation course, it can make the difference between a 20 and a 23. Why? Just because you walked the property and your observation skills have been sharpened, and now you can look and go, by the pictures, we didn't see this. But now that we're walking, all of this, it's indicating to me that this site is really too wet. It's not going to grow fruit trees well. It looks good on photographs, but when you get there, the plants are crying to you, hey, this is a wet site. This is wet here. You're going to have to put in, if you want to grow fruit trees there, you would have to put in drainage. So figure at least $500 to $1,000 per acre to add drainage. Or you're going to have to modify the site by mounding it. That's a lot of cost. Is it worth it? So all these tricks and tips and things that will help you score and evaluate a project or a property before you buy. Because once you buy, I like to say it's easier to plant the right plant in the right site than it is to make the site right for the plant. Let's say you wanted to grow red currants. Well, it's way easier to get the right place for red currants than it is to take a site and say, yeah, well, I got this site and now I want to grow red currants. So yeah, I will take some changes, like drainage, or it's too dry and you've got to irrigate everything because this is just pure sand. And so every time you have to change, and Yeomans in his books talks about the scale of permanence. And there are things that you can change. There is a scale at which you can make changes to a site in terms of how easy it is to make it. It doesn't necessarily consider how expensive it is to make it. So a lot of times the scale of permanence is based on what you can. And yes, you can make a site right for the plant, but it's far easier to choose the right plant for the site existing. So that's why I say choose the best site based on what you want to grow. You have to first know what dominant crop or crops, preferably crops, you want to grow. What are their conditions? And then what is it that they would need? And then find the needed property to grow those. That is so much easier than saying, yeah, well, I got this site and I've seen it too many times. That, oh yeah, we got this property, we found this property. Well, I'm not sure what we want to do, but we found this property. And then a year later, yeah, now we found out about the permaculture orchard. Now we want to put in a permaculture orchard. Well, you have one of the worst properties to put in an orchard. I hate to tell you. And sometimes I've told people, listen, it's a hard lesson to learn, but you're really better off selling this property and buying another one, because what it will take to make this site right for an orchard is more hassle, more trouble, and more cost than what it's worth. But I love the house. What does that mean to me? You were super emotional about something. You decided, I don't care what the property's like, I love the house. Well, listen, if you love the house, that's great. That's a lovely property to live on. But don't consider that as the best property to grow something on. Or if it is, maybe it means put in huge propagation areas for things like water iris, because that's what it's best suited for. It's not suited for fruit trees. So maybe some of you go, yeah, now I'm stuck with that. And if you are, hey, chalk it up to experience. Prices can be very interesting right now, and maybe it's a good time to sell and look for a site that is more suited to what you want to do. I know it's not something you like to hear, especially if you already made the effort, did all the investment, did the searching, and you found the place. But now you realize, yeah, that's really not the right place for what you want to do. The decision is yours. You've made it, and maybe you didn't know any of this before, and that's why now you're learning about this. Well, from what I've seen, it's better to start from scratch than to try to undo what is there to then redo. I know I did it, and wow, it would have been so much easier for me to leave the monoculture apple orchard I had, buy another property, and start from scratch there. Tough lessons, and I can tell you from experience, the time and money you would have saved. So the decision is yours. Choose the best site for your chosen crops. You will never, never regret that you chose the ideal site for what you want to do. That's not going to be, you may say, yeah, the house wasn't the best, or we didn't have a pond, but you won't regret that this is the best site for what you want to grow. Because when that grows like, what did I say? Like weeds, you'll go, oh, yeah, I mean, we are growing these crops, and it's so easy. It's just so easy. They just grow naturally. I hope I have imbued unto you the importance of that good choice. Is it important? It is vital. Because if you're going to say, yeah, now I have to do this, and now I have to do that, and I have to water, and I have to spray because it's not the best, you will never regret you chose the absolute best site for what you want to do. Now let's go with the three ethics of permaculture. This is the core mindset really for permaculture. The first one is earth care, taking care of the earth. We want to take care of the earth. We want it to be better. The reason you're on this course is I'm sure you are concerned about the earth. You want the earth to be better. You want it to be, you just want improvement. So for that, let me open an idea box for you. If I say to you the word sustainable, do you like that? Do you say, yeah, I like sustainable. Sustainable is a good idea. I hate sustainable. You know why? Because it's this. Sustainable is keeping on as we're now doing. Is that really what we want? Do we want to just, yeah, you know, the way it's going is the way it will be? No! Why are we learning this? Why are we doing these efforts? We're doing them so that we can improve, make it better, make it more productive, make the earth sing with abundance and health and harmony. Is that the idea of sustainable? No. Sustainable is this. Let's not even talk about a decline. Like, hopefully, we're over the period where we do harm so that the Earth's capacity declines. Like, let's not even think about that one. Sustainable, please don't even make that your minimum. Well, maybe a minimum. But let's focus now on regeneration. Regeneration means it's an increase. It's making it better. It's improving the health of the soils, the air, the waters, the land, the carrying capacity of the habitats. That's regeneration. That's what we should be focused on. That should be our attention. And so you're in this course because you are thinking care of the earth. That's the first ethic of permaculture. But make it the idea that, yes, I want to leave this planet knowing that I've done everything I could to make it better. So I could leave a better legacy for those who come after me. Maybe not even your kids, maybe just your neighborhood, your neighbors, your city, your town, or your larger community. Make it so that you're leaving something that is better. So that's earth care. Second ethic of permaculture is people care. I think, well, of course we should take care of people. Yes. How do we take care of people? Hopefully just make the environment, make the earth care so good that people are taken care of because they're not in lack of food. They're not in lack of resources. There's not a lack, and we can do that through the ethics and through applying permaculture. The third one is limiting consumption and sharing surplus. And I like to add a parenthesis on that when you think, okay, limiting consumption. Well, do we need as much as we think, oh, well, I need this and I need that? First, distinguish between the two things. Is it a need or a want? That's the source of so many problems, is we don't make a distinction. We think need and want. Well, whatever I need, I want, or whatever I want, I need. No, you really want to distinguish the difference between that. Your need is, what do you need? You need some food, you need clothing, and you need shelter. That's our three basic needs. And when we look at habitats for animals, that's the three. That's the core. That's what we focus on. We don't say, what does the animal want? Oh, he wants a better warm bed to sleep in, or he wants... No. He has needs, and you meet those needs. You can make them a little more luxurious, just like you can for yourself. But distinguish the difference between a need and a want. Where we miss is distributing surplus. And you think, well, we don't have a surplus. We don't have too much. Imagine a pie, you know. We think a pie is a certain size, and this is what it is. And, you know, I have my piece, you have your piece. But we don't have to look at that little pie, because the pie could be bigger and bigger and bigger. And it could be almost unlimited, because the earth is almost unlimited in its capacity. So the bigger we make the pie, the more we have abundance to distribute a surplus. And let me say one thing about distributing surplus, which people often miss. You think, yeah, distributing surplus to people. And that is good. That we really need to think about that, of producing enough, making our environments healthy enough, abundant enough that we can share a surplus. With people, yes, but we really need to think we're not alone here. We're not the only ones. It's not just people on this planet. So we need to look at sharing that surplus with nature. And that's in all the different levels. What are we doing for the bats? What are we doing for the fish? What are we doing for the birds? Of course, I'm bird brain, so I think about the birds. But there's more to it than just birds. So what are we doing in our design, in our yard, in our homestead, on our property, to make it so that there is extras to share with nature? If you get that right, that solves so many problems. That's why it's 3 ethics: earth care, people care, and fair share, or sharing of surplus. Whew. That's a big one. That's the 3 ethics. There's an excellent document you should get. It's The Essence of Permaculture by one of the co-founders, David Holmgren. And it lists, and this is what I'm following in this presentation, is the 3 ethics and the 12 principles. But take a look at that. It's a super read on understanding better and deeper these core elements of permaculture. Wow, is this getting exciting? Especially once you get the model base down, it starts to seem real. I mean, this is your property. Ooh, remember all your cards, and you paired them, and you prepared a blob, which is the most logical one next to another space. Now, to make your model really come to life, what you want to do is take each of your space cards and say, vegetable garden, how much do I really need? Or what do I really want? What's the next 5 years in terms of vegetable garden? And you say, oh, well, I would need 20 feet by 20 feet. All right. That's what you figure you'll need for your vegetable garden? Very good. So now this card, vegetable garden, has a size. What shape? You know what, the shape, this one, let's keep it square. All right, so it's a square shape and it's 20 feet by 20 feet. So that's step 1. Now, when you take that and you put it where the most logical place of your space was. So now we're putting that as vegetable garden, but now it blows to 20 feet by 20 feet. So let's say our property was 100 feet by 100 feet. So 20 is 1/5. You could take this and say 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty close. It's pretty close. That's how you could scale it? Sure, that works pretty well. Maybe the only thing is it's a little longer than 20 feet. So what you can do is you say this and this. Use your hand measures. It's really quick and easy. You see, we're starting to get to more precise, but no, kill yourself over that kind of precision. So that is about a 20-foot by 20-foot vegetable garden right off the house. That makes sense. Good. Very good. Now you've got that one done. So size and shape. What's the next one? Your north side hedge. Well, your north side hedge wasn't existing. Are you going to change it? No. Well, obviously that shape is not the shape of the card. So you could leave the card on there just to identify that that's your north side hedge, but that's the size and the shape as it is. Keep going through your pile. Your garage. Actually, wow, that's the exact size and shape to scale of your garage. Very good. Your house. Well, no, your house changed sizes. So your house has changed. It's a different shape. It's a longish house. The hot tub. The hot tub. Wow, that's a big hot tub if you said that. So you allotted the space hot tub. You figured it would be really nice to have it right off the house and right near the pond. So that's the most logical space. Now, to make that into the scale, yeah. So measure it, shape it. It's a squared hot tub. There you go. You see how your original space or allotted space card has now changed. Your lawn was over here. Is that that's fine. That works for your lawn. The only thing is your lawn should encircle it does encircle your vegetable garden. So it's really more like this. There you go. Now you got a size and a shape to go with the lawn card. Your permaculture orchard. Whoa. You figured how much do you need for a permaculture orchard? We didn't ask that for lawn. Do you realize? But because my experience is people can reduce between 50 and 90% of their lawns. They don't need that much because lawn is, well, it's not used actively. It's usually just for aesthetics. So you don't need that much. I won't get into that today for that. Permaculture orchard. You would like a 30 by 40 foot permaculture orchard, which happens to be really this size. So 30 by 40, that works. So that becomes the size and the shape of your permaculture orchard. You realize, for illustration purposes, I am keeping things simple and keeping squares and rectangles just because it's a lot simpler. The pond was squared when we worked on the card, and we cut it because, well, we just cut out a pond because that was an item you'd like to have. But the pond is not a square. It's actually shaped longer. Your quiet space, we said it should be away from the house. That was what you figured would make the most sense, but close to the pond so it would show reflection. And so again, for purposes of illustration, I went ahead and made a quiet space. So that would be the size and shape of your quiet space. There you go. The greenhouse. Hey, the greenhouse. Where did we allot the greenhouse? Listen, south side of the house, greenhouse. You see that card doesn't quite work. Right next to the house, next to the vegetable area. But that would be the greenhouse. So you see, now we've gone from our card, giving them a size and a shape. Obviously, the greenhouse in this case is much longer, not as wide, but much longer. So change your cards around to allot to a space, or you know what? You can just go, this will now be the lawn. And three-dimensional, not a problem. This will be the permaculture orchard. Whoa, you know what we could do? We could actually make that all three-dimensional. The hedge. Do we really need to write that's a hedge? Let's write it on the back of it, just so that as you play with others, they will know. So there's the hedge. There you go. If you really need to find it, you can find it. The same with this. Well, what's that little building out there? You could say this is the quiet space. And whose is this? This is Jane's quiet space. Jane, if you're watching, you think, yeah, I want a quiet space. Well, it is a good thing to have a quiet space, to get away from it all at times. So there you go. Now we have the areas we had determined make sense. We have them associated with the space next to it that we've determined makes sense. And now we are giving it a size and a shape that makes sense, except for the lawn. The lawn doesn't make sense. It's way too big. But you know what? That comes down to finding lost space. You see why I said earlier, you want to dream big. Because when you start to do this, you'll realize that, you know what? You probably have more space than you need. And so you need to figure out, what are you going to do with all that lawn space? All this lawn space, all this area. You've got space. So you can dream big. You'll want to put in your shrub, your fruiting shrub area. Hey, this is a good place for a fruiting shrub area. Close to the house, right off the garage. You drive in. You know what? I see all those nice blueberries. I'm going to come and just feast on blueberries. You see, those are those associations that you go, that's a pleasant way to do it. In the fall, the blueberries will be all red, really nice color, and so on, and so on, and so on. Edges. I can be fanatical about the edge. It really comes back to my days as a landscape architect, where I saw that you can put a lot of effort in design, and then it can all be ruined during maintenance because of edges. So edge is anywhere where you go from one use or one cover type to another cover type. It could be the area from grass to perennials. It could be from a path to a shrub. It could be from the trees to the shrubs. Anywhere you're changing that edge, how you will maintain it, because we're talking about maintenance. Edges are what make and break maintenance. I mean, when I see a design, I look right away, how are they going to maintain it and what are they doing on the edges? Because to me, that is what I know can make or break that project. You can spend so much time on that edge. I'll give you a good example. If you see somebody spending hours with a weed eater or a weed whacker, whatever you call them in your area, which is a string trimmer, which is a rotating string. If somebody's going and using a string trimmer, to me that's a sure sign that there has not been as much thought in the design, in the details of the design as needed to reduce the maintenance, because string trimming is just improper attention to edges. That's all it is. If you're doing string trimming, if you even own a string trimmer, then you're probably not paying enough attention to those edges. And there are ways of reducing it that are simple, long-lasting. In fact, anytime you use pavers, especially along grass, which is often where people use string trimmers because, well, your grass is growing and then the edge here, you can't maintain it with the mower, so you go with a string trimmer. Well, look, in that spot where you go from the grass to, let's say, the perennials, put a stone, put an edge, put a paver, put flat stones, put something to break up that line so that you can mow to the edge of the grass and the perennials will do the rest. You can use that with perennials. For example, where we grow hostas around fruit trees, we'll put a whole mass of hostas so that the hostas grow big leaves and the leaves it'll be a clump and the leaves will grow over the grass, and then we can come in and mow right under those leaves so that there's no place that the grass grows higher, and it eliminates that edge. So the plant can do the edge, or it is a design choice, or the pavers can do the edge so that it reduces that amount of maintenance. Think of, are you using a string trimmer? And if you are, then think of how else you can do that. We have in the permaculture orchard many kilometers, many miles of edge where we go from the grass to where the trees are. Now, if I had to go through and do miles of string trimming somewhere, that wouldn't make sense. I mean, I wouldn't be here talking to you, and I'd have to be out there doing string trimming. So how can that make sense? Well, I've used a plastic mulch to act as the edge between the grass and the trees, and then the perennials and so on, so that I can mow right on that plastic strip. Takes care of the grass, but it doesn't leave it where I need to come back. And that treatment of the edge is really important. Those details of design really make for a simple to maintain system. So always be aware of the edges you create. Seek to minimize the maintenance, make it easy, simple, or ideally eliminate that maintenance altogether. It really comes down to the Pareto principle. Maybe you've heard of that, the 80-20 rule. It really applies to maintenance. Pareto says 80% of the area will take 20% of the time of maintenance. Well, then the opposite is 20% of your area will take 80% of the time. Ooh, wait a minute. Yes, it's right. And often that time will be your edges. If you can make your edges so simple that there's no maintenance to do, or it's done as another step, as for example mowing, then you've eliminated that potential of 20%. I know we have one area that takes a lot of maintenance just because of the configuration. It's our parking lot, but we have a grassed parking lot, and we have treed and shrub triangles and that edge. So last year we actually added some wooden panels on the ground to make that edge mowable and not have to come in and do another treatment. Look at your place, look at your site, and think, where am I spending the majority of my maintenance time? It might be in your perennials. Maybe you're growing perennials near your trees and they're not thick enough, and so there's all these other plants coming up, some that you may like, some that you may not like. Well, that's simply a lack of density. If you made your plantings more dense so that they would reduce the incidence of other plants coming in just because they're dense. So design choices are important. Look at what you're doing. That's why I said measure, chronicle. Have an idea, how much time did I spend there? You may be able to do a large area very quickly and then spend a lot of time on a small area. Well, do you need that small area? Can you completely eliminate it? Can you change it? Can you do something that will really reduce that 80-20 to being part of the 80% of the area that takes 20% of the time? Always look for your 20%. In fact, it's more like 5% of the area takes 95% of the time, it seems. So look for those. And here's a simple exercise for you. Consider your site. Identify on it, what area do you spend the most time on? Maybe it's grass. You have a smallish area of grass, but it takes a lot of time because it's a weekly. Okay, first identify it, and secondly, put down a few suggestions. How can you reduce that time? Can you reduce it in half? Can you reduce it by 10 times? And once you reduce maintenance by 10 times, it changes completely how the maintenance happens. So there you go. Do that quick exercise. Consider your edges, consider all your other maintenance, and look at how you can affect the time spent on the different areas. Do it now. Let's continue to downsize the domestic animals. So we saw larger herbivores, we saw geese and turkeys. Now let's look at chickens. Chickens are kind of the universal recognized permaculture animal. Even if you're vegetarian or vegan, you can still keep laying hens and give away eggs. It doesn't matter. But laying hens are really a very simple starter animal. If you want to just have one animal to introduce to the orchard, chickens are really, really handy. They'll give you something daily, which is really nice, and they do a lot of work. So we saw in the introduction to permaculture the whole diagram of all the different functions and products that a chicken can provide. They are working for you. They're cleaning up fruit. They are turning the soil a little bit, at least scratching the soil. So that's great. And they are basically recycling, preparing the site for something else while depositing their nitrogen-rich manure. And don't underestimate the change that manure does. And it's quite striking when we see just 1 week or 2 weeks before where chickens were, and we say, wow, look at the grass growth. Look at how well the grass is picking up in that area. And it's always impressive to me. And I've seen it so many times, but I'm still impressed because it's like, that is the contribution of that animal. That is the ally contribution. And it's noticeable. It's really noticeable. And so what the chickens need to simplify it to the max is a shelter, is a pen, and we use what we call the pen house, which is simply a hooped pen on 2 rails, open at both ends with a covering, and we use a silage tarp covering because we can flip it by the season. So it can be white to keep it cooler, or late season or early spring, we can flip it to be the black side plastic to provide some extra warmth. On a cold day, if they want it a little warmer, they go inside. And we've used this even in a winter setting. We just set it out there and put ends. We put an opaque end on one end and we face it into the sun in the other end and put clear plastic to make a little greenhouse dome in the front. And they spent the winter in there being able to go out, and they went out a lot. But the change inside was remarkable. The heat, it was always 20 degrees warmer. So if it was minus 20 outside and you went in, it was, 15 degrees, let's say. It was about minus 5 inside. My glasses would get all foggy. So it was quite remarkable how simple it takes to provide what they need. And they looked great. I can't stand, and let me say this, I can't stand seeing people raising animals or just seeing animals that are dirty. So whether it's chickens with their feathers all ratty and dirty, there's times where a chicken looks ratty because it's molting, but if they're ratty because, they're walking in their own deposits, that just bothers me. If I see cows or sheep that are caked in manure, listen, that person is not doing good animal husbandry. They are just not respectful to the animal. You should, if that is your case and you say, yeah, I've had animals that have been really, maybe you're really not suited to have animals. And that happens. People don't really like animals, but they're raising animals. And don't do that. You need to have a sense of respect and towards animal husbandry. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that. Well, the chickens, they will provide some product. They will do a work, And they only need a few things. They need a shelter, which I described. They need good fresh water. That's an important one. They need grit. And grit is so important. Most fowl are not given enough grit. Let me just come back on that, just to give you an example. When we had turkeys, we actually had a trailer load of gravel dumped. And when we had 200 turkeys, and we would use up a trailer load of gravel in one season as grit for those turkeys. And what does grit do for turkeys, for geese as well? Geese, ducks, chickens, all the fowl need grit. Grit is different size particles of little gravel. It could be, well, it's beyond large sand. It's small gravel, and the larger the bird, the bigger the pieces. So a turkey will take something that's about almost the size of my pinky fingernail. So they eat a range of different gravels, and they are picky about the gravel they use. They could, and I remember watching the turkeys, they would pick something up and they'd feel it in their beak, and it's like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. They could tell the different types of rock by the feel. Like, don't ask me how, but they ate the stuff. So if you eat something, you generally know about what you're eating, or you should. And so the turkeys and the chickens and the geese, they're peculiar about what gravel they eat. So they need grit, they need water, they need food. Usually they need supplementing of some sort. Ideally, you could be keeping chickens that get everything from the area you give them. And if you're doing that, you've got to be moving them frequently, because they will eat out the best stuff, and then they're going to start running low on food. We supplement them with an organic grain, a mixed grain, and that works fine. Food, cover, water. Hey, didn't we touch on that earlier? Food in the grain and what they gather. Cover in the shelter we give them, because we give them one. Do you have to give them one? Well, I guess it depends on what climate you're in. But the advantage of giving them a shelter is, again, it's a mobile roost. It's a way to direct what area needs a little more manure. That area. So you put the roost in that area, and suddenly that area jumps in quality. The soil is improved, and the grass growth and the plant growth is improved. So you use the shelter. Don't leave it. We try to move it every day. Even if we have the chickens in an area for a week, we try to even just move it one length ahead every day. And that movement is really important to distribute that. And we found that the eggs are really cleaner, because the chickens are not as likely to walk through their poo to get to the laying box. So if they're walking through clean grass, and they stay cleaner because they've got a large area and it's not loaded with manure everywhere, then they're cleaner. They go in the nest box. Their feet are cleaner. They don't want to have dirty, poopy feet. They want to have clean feet. So help them get what they need. Be respectful for the animals. So food, cover, water, basics, and grit. So I consider grit part of the food. And I was just going to say, but let me complete what the importance of grit is. It's a gravel that is used in an organ that fowl have, which is called a gizzard. We don't have a gizzard, but they do. So it's a holdover from dinosaurs, because they know that dinosaurs they would find these big rocks. They would find softball-sized rocks in where a dinosaur fossil was. So that the dinosaurs would eat big rocks to help grind. It's the same principle, and you think, wow, how did people learn to grind their grain with stones? They just looked at the animals. Oh, these animals are eating grain, and look, they're eating stones. Why? Well, if you open up a chicken and you open up the gizzard, you'll find the seeds and you'll find gravel. And the gizzard is just this huge muscle. It's just a muscle that is used to contract, to cause the rocks to grind against the seeds. And that's the beauty of a gizzard. In fact, when I used to bring the turkeys to an abattoir, the people had never seen gizzards that large in turkeys. They were like, look at these gizzards. My God, they're huge. Why? Because they're a muscle. And the more they're used to grind up the food, we would give them whole corn, especially to make them eat more gravel, to grind the corn, to make cornmeal, and that would cause they would get more rock, grind the rock against the grain, and they would grind rock against rock. And that is how an animal releases minerals and has a high dose of minerals. And that is the real importance in grit. People always underestimate the mineral contribution. Our animals have bones that are solid because they have all the minerals they need. You may not get enough minerals, but if you eat meat that has had a full dose of minerals, you're getting added minerals. And so the same with the eggs. The eggs are mineral rich. They have fantastic shells because they get that from the grit. And people give oyster shells, and oyster shells are good, but they're usually it's calcium carbonate. So you're getting calcium, but you're not necessarily getting all the other mineral elements available from rock. We'll go into this in mineral part of soils. If you aren't going to get that, you're missing out, because you really want to understand that importance of minerals. It's important for animals, it's important for us, it's important for the plants we're growing. Mineral rich, ever hear the expression nutrient dense food? Well, when they say nutrient dense, the nutrients come from the minerals. So grit is a great way of recycling rock into animals through their manure now. And not all manure is equal. Remember that. If animal has had abundance of grit, good mixed rock, which means it's not a single source rock, and a lot of feed that you buy is a single source rock ground up into grit and given. That's not the best. The best is a glacial deposit, is a mixed rock, is the equivalent of a creek bed, the rock along a creek bed. And if you ever see wild turkeys, they're walking along the creek bed, picking up the grit they need. So that's a long story for understanding grit. I want you to think, I'm raising animals. In the case of fowl, I need to give them grit. If you're raising herbivores, you need to supplement the minerals because often they're not getting enough of the minerals. Soils are often depleted in certain minerals, and the animals will show symptoms of mineral depletion in sicknesses. So it comes back to this whole thing that the pest is not the problem. The disease is not the problem. The disease or the pest is pointing to a problem, and so much of disease or dis-ease, they're not in ease, they're in dis-ease. That dis-ease is showing up primarily because of a mineral either imbalance or mineral deficiency. That's a lot about minerals. So that's it with laying hens. Consider using them. They are an incredible addition to your allies and a great place to start if you want just one type of animal to add to your orchard, to your homestead, even to your backyard. Now, you've got 5 and a 6th sense. What are you doing with this information? What will you do that will allow a change, that will stimulate a change, that will create something better on your project, your garden, your homestead, your orchard, your farm, your backyard, whatever it is? What will you do using the information to make a change? Well, the most useful tool with the skills of observing is that by observing, by building up this repertoire, this database of what is going on, what is at certain times of the year, times of the month, times of the day, what is going on, you will be able to walk onto your property and very quickly you will sense, something is wrong. You'll be able to say, oh, they're lacking in water. Why? Because you have observed what is normally, and then using your sense of observation, you will see what is not normal, what is abnormal, what's outside the usual. It could be, all of a sudden, I heard something. Wow, I haven't heard that before. That's a new bird. I can get excited about it. And I really do get excited about hearing new birds. But because I have such a background of knowing what should be there, that when I hear something that isn't, oh, listen, what's that? And so build up your knowing what is normal, and what is not will be like a flag. It will be like, wow, that's different. Could be an insect. You're used to seeing certain, where is the insect? Look, there's an insect on the leaf. Where on the leaf? There's an insect. What's it doing? And so that baseline, it really is, it's like a baseline, a reference point that will really help you know as soon as something is not right, not normal. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean because it's not the same, but you'll be attentive to notice it. And if that's your usual project, if you go somewhere else and you go and all of a sudden you already have a baseline. It's great when you're traveling because all of a sudden everything is new. You feel like a giant vacuum sucking in all of the senses. You're firing off and you're noticing everything is new to you, perhaps for that complete area, but also new in that you have reference points and you're going, wow, this is going, this is, and so it builds up a greater sense, even if it's just to build your database, even if it's just your repertoire of these are the things. The more observation you do, in the more areas you do it, and then you feel, one of my design teachers used to explain it to us. He would say, have you ever seen a painter, with a palette or a palette in French, and you have different paints? He said, when you start designing, you maybe have 3 colors. And then you learn to dab this one with that one. It gives you a combination of those 2. And then as you go on in your designing, you start to add another color. Now I've just had a 4th or a 5th color. And now your combinations increase tremendously. Well, it's the same with observing. You observe and you notice a few things. And as you go on, you go from 3 colors to 5 colors to 8 colors to 10. And pretty soon, you realize you have a big palette. You can combine these colors ad infinitum. Just the number of combinations you can make is huge. So that's really one of the keys, is to be able to synthesize, observe, and make sense of it, but also compare it to what you already know. And you become far more effective at observing than in any situation, in any place, in any context. Start in your yard, start in your backyard, start on your balcony. Expand it to your whole garden, expand it to some neighborhood park, expand it to your homestead, expand it to your region, and so on and so on. And then you feel more and more comfortable operating, observing in that area. Let me give you a few resources that can be very helpful to document, because you observe. Now what do you do with them? Yes, it builds up mentally. You will notice your data set, your data bank will increase. But it's useful to be able to document what you see hey, if you don't have a phone, you can go with a notebook, and that works. Most of these phones nowadays, the great virtue is that you can retrieve information quickly. I just saw an indigo bunting. Well, maybe you use an app, and a great app for birds is eBird. You can write down what you saw, it'll note when you saw it, and you can search. When did I see it? What time of year was it? Oh yeah, it was migrating at the same time as these other birds. That's when I'm more likely to see it, and so on. And you can add notes. Hey, I saw it at the same time as the apple tree started to bloom. That's useful. Phenology, very, very useful, rather than just a date. You can use your notes. Any phone will give you the ability to write notes. The valuable thing about anything that you're using is if it's searchable. Are you able to type in indigo bunting and it will find that information for you? That's useful. That kind of quick searching. Look, I got a whole shelf of notebooks, and to search through them now, that would take a long time. Some of it I may remember. It's somewhere in the mid 80s. Whew. That means 5 years or so of notebooks. Good luck. So we can today have apps, have things that will search through much quicker. Maybe it's for plants and you want to go through PlantSnap or Seekit. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, there are lots of different apps. I'll put a few resources on some of the most popular. The most powerful of all those apps is their AI engines, which learn as people upload, and that makes them more and more precise. eBird just came out, so I'm dating this a little, but eBird just came out with the equivalent of a Shazam for birds. You just press the button, it's going to record the bird song, and then it'll tell you what birds are singing. I mean, that's powerful. I wish I had that years ago. I would have had a huge, much bigger bird list just because I don't know what it is. And today, the power of what we have here is pretty amazing. To document and to record your information if they are searchable. So use those tools. We have them. Use them. Go to a notebook if you need to, and that works too. It's just not as easily searchable. Now, out of all these different ways of selling, I want you to make one clear distinction. First of all, distinguish between retail selling, which is direct to the eater. So you are selling direct. Retail, we call it retail, but it's selling, you sell to the person who will be using it. And then there's wholesale. And wholesale is where you sell to someone who sells, perhaps to the eater, perhaps to some other channel of distribution, but you're not in direct contact with the person who is eating it. So make that distinction in every way you sell and aim as much as possible to sell direct to the eater. Because you are growing something that is unique. You're growing something that is beyond organic. And so you should have contact as much as possible with the person who will be eating it. And then they associate, oh, you're the one who grows this. Yes, I am. And you get them to be more faithful to buying from you. And it's a relationship. When you sell through a wholesaler, and maybe you're growing a lot and you'd be advertising, you're really not buying direct, you're not making that direct connection as much. Let me just go through these direct to eater as a comparison. So you have things like a farmer's market, a farm kiosk, a vending machine, door to door, your CSA, a mail order catalog, a mail order website, U-Pick, membership U-Pick, and having an auction. So those are direct to eater retail type selling situations. Now let's look at some of the wholesale ways of selling. Imagine supplying a farmers who then have kiosks at a farmer's market. So you're not the one having the stand, but you're selling to perhaps people who sell vegetables. Maybe they're selling vegetables and they'd like to add fruit. And you supply several vendors at a farmer's market with fruit. That's a way. A distributor. So you sell through a distributor. You're not selling direct. Vending machine distributor. So similar idea as a vending machine, but now you're selling to someone who has a whole series of vending machines and they're stocking your fruit in the vending machine. Supply a veggie CSA. Supply a mail order catalog. Supply a store. A cafeteria. Cafeteria. Imagine when you were in school, if you could get fruit that you'd go, and imagine if you got the kids hooked on the quality while they were in school, that instead of throwing the fruit, they would take a bite and they'd go, oh my gosh, hey, did you try these? Did you try these pears? They're amazing. Did you try these plums? Man, you got to get some of these plums. They're crazy. If you had the kids in school saying when they came home, Mom, you should see we had fruit at school. That is so crazy good. Imagine that. How would that change? Then the parents would be going, well, where do they buy these vegetables? I'd like to get some of these fruit. You just got to make that first contact, that first mouthful. And if your product, if your fruit or your vegetables or your nuts are that good, that people will, you've just put a new notch in their head, then that will really sell itself. And we have a great example with our plums. I know now that if I could just get people to try them when they are so ripe, because stores cannot stock ripe plums. They'll have plum jam. You can't stock really ripe plums. But when they buy them in a basket because they've just been picked a day ago or that day, and now they try them really ripe, I know they'll be hooked because they can't get that quality. Supplying a restaurant and selling to an auction that then auctions off your products. Let's just look at a couple of examples. I saw this it's in Europe, and they had a raw milk vending machine. I thought, wow, raw milk vending machine. Here's a farmer who, at the roadside, has a vending machine, and you just come with your container and you fill up in bulk the quantity. So it's like a 1 liter, or 1 liter is 1 quart container, and you pay so much per unit. But it dispenses the milk right at the vending machine. It stays cold in there. It's a vending machine for milk. That gets PR. That gets people's attention. Got my attention. A farm roadside stand. And if you have a property and you follow what we're going to talk about with choosing the site based on some of these criteria, you'll see that having a roadside stand becomes just such an easy way to sell. And if you are anywhere on a busier road, wow, it can be your major way of selling. And if you go with an honor system, it's, I won't say no work, but it's low work. You're basically replenishing and collecting cash, and people are coming and buying, and it's quite the way of operating. So a roadside stand is another way of selling. Imagine walking in your own backyard, your homestead, or your orchard, being able to pick delicious ripe fruit. Maybe you want to know the quality of your fruit or where it comes from. Maybe it's for health reasons, for your children or for your grandchildren. Maybe it's to experience abundance. All this without having to resort to synthetic fertilizers or synthetic pesticides to grow your fruit trees, and without spending days a week maintaining your orchard. I know it can be daunting. I know how much work it could be if it's not set up right. I did it. I had a 4,000 tree organic monoculture apple orchard. It doesn't work as an ecosystem. It certainly doesn't work as an easy system. The permaculture orchard does work. It restores the ecosystem. It works with nature rather than against nature. You are part of the ecosystem. It's yours to enjoy if it's set up right. In the last 3 years, we've been working on the Masterclass. In it, we cover everything I wish I had when I started. It's been a steep learning curve, and it's cost me tens of thousands of dollars in errors. We've put the Masterclass together to save you the time and money. I've put a lot of information on YouTube. And in the Masterclass, we cover all the details that you would need to put together your own permaculture orchard. The Masterclass is everything I've learned over 40 years as a biologist, a landscape architect, an organic orchardist. And in the last 15 years, I put it all together in the permaculture orchard. My vision is 1,000 people, 1,000 hectares in 50 countries adopting the permaculture orchard model of growing fruit while also encouraging wildlife. To accomplish this vision, I need people like you interested in starting their own permaculture orchard. I began with the film, then the YouTube channel, the virtual tour, and now Masterclass. The Masterclass was created with this goal in mind, offering users like you a platform to learn, whether you're advanced or you're just a beginner. The groups allow you to easily communicate with me or with other like-minded students to advance your project successfully, because in the end, that's what we all want. We give you a lifetime access to the 11 different courses that make up the Masterclass, including all future updates as content is added. There is so much in the Masterclass with over 23 hours of unique videos. We're so confident that we allow users to start each course for free, and we offer you a 30-day, no questions asked money-back guarantee, and we offer an easy payment plan. If you're serious about wanting your own permaculture orchard, I want to offer you this incredible tool that I wish I had to help make your dream become a reality.